Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's discussion. My name is Karen Ejiofor, and I'm the project coordinator of the Technology and Public Purpose Project at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. And I'm joined by my colleague, Amritha Jayanti, an amazing researcher on our team. The TAPP project works to ensure that emerging technologies are developed and managed in ways that serve the overall public good. Today, we're excited to host filmmaker and producer Shalini Kantayya to discuss her recent documentary, Coded Bias, which follows MIT Media Lab researcher Joy Buolamwini and her exploration of the risks, particularly for minorities, caused by algorithmic bias.
So as an overview of today's session, we'll kick off the conversation with a few questions for Shalini about coded bias. Then around 12:40, we'll open up the floor to you all in the audience so you can ask specific questions. If you have a question, please use the Zoom Q&A chat feature. Additionally, as part of this event, TAPP is raffling off copies of 3 books: Algorithms of Oppression by Safia Nobel, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill, and Twitter and Tear Gas by Zainab Tufekci. So to enter the raffle, follow TAPP on Twitter at @TAPP_project, and we'll randomly select 3 winners.
And with that, let's welcome Shalini.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Good morning.
Thank you. So we'll just briefly introduce Shalini. So director, producer Shalini Kantayya, feature documentary Coded Bias premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. She directed an episode of the National Geographic television series Breakthrough, executive produced by Ron Howard, and broadcast globally in 2017. Her debut film feature, Catching the Sun, premiered at the Los Angeles Film Festival and was named a New York Times Critics' Pick. Catching the Sun released globally on Netflix on Earth Day in 2016 and was executive produced by Leonardo DiCaprio. Would love to hear more about that. It was for the Environmental Media Association Award for Best Documentary. Shalini is a TED Fellow, a William J. Fulbright Scholar, and a finalist for the ABC Disney DGA Directing Program. She is also an associate of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. Shalini, thank you again for joining us, and we're super excited to have you here.
Thanks again.
So just to get started, we have a simple question, but probably a loaded question, which what compelled you to tell the story of Coded Bias? And it's just worth noting that there may be some people in the audience who haven't had a chance to watch the film, which if you haven't, please do. So if you wouldn't mind giving a brief synopsis of the film as well, so you could provide some additional context, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, my film Coded Bias follows a MIT researcher named Joy Buolamwini and her discovery that facial recognition does not see dark faces or women with as much accuracy as it sees white men. And sort of that sets me on a journey and her on a journey to sort of uncover racial and gender bias in so many of the artificial intelligence systems that we interact with every day. And my background is, I'm sort of a sci-fi fanatic. And a few years ago, when I began making this film, I didn't really know about artificial intelligence or what algorithms were or anything like that. And sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole when I read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. I love the 3 books that you're giving away. Someone's going to be very lucky to read those 3 books because they were 3 books that changed my life. And sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole of the dark side of these technologies. And I think, everything that I had known about AI had sort of come from the brain of Steven Spielberg, sort of this sort of, and Stanley Kubrick. If you don't know who that is, find out. Like 2001 is amazing. There are lots of great things that have happened, and that's one of the most amazing films in science fiction history. And so I think everything I knew about AI had come through this lens of science fiction, that I didn't really realize how AI was being used in the now. And I didn't realize that algorithms, machine learning, AI are all the ways in which human beings are already outsourcing our decision making to these machines in terms of they're already deciding sometimes the first gatekeeper of opportunity of who gets hired, who gets what quality of healthcare, who gets undue police scrutiny. Sometimes they're the first automated gatekeeper in a college admissions. And so I didn't realize that these systems were being used in these really intimate ways that just are already governing human opportunity and destinies. And at the same time, through Joy Buolamwini's research and Timnit Gebru's research, Deborah Raji, and so many others in the film, what was most alarming to me is that these same systems that are governing human destiny have not been vetted for racial bias, for gender bias, or even that they'll do the thing that they said that they'll do with some common shared agreement of accuracy, because we don't have one that's not based on the companies that create these technologies. And that's when I began to see really clearly that we could roll back 50 years of civil rights advances in the name of machine neutrality. That AI is going to touch and is touching and transforming everything we love in a democracy. Fair housing, equal employment, equal access to opportunity, the fact that Black communities shouldn't have undue police scrutiny and brutality. AI is transforming all of these values and systems that we have, and in a way that is completely opaque to us. That all the, you all go to Harvard, are very brilliant, you know that knowledge is power. And what I learned in the making of this film is that when it comes to artificial intelligence, all of the knowledge has been in the hands of a few. And so all of the power has then been in the hands of a few. And that some of these systems are making false claims about what they can do. And sometimes you can't even see the way that they're infringing in civil rights. And that's when I began to realize this is one of the biggest issues of our time, and sort of what kept me making Coded Bias.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a big and important issue. And there was a phrase that you said that was like in the now, right? And thinking about this moment in time where technology is being deployed in this way. And I think something that's so interesting is that a story like this is never told in isolation, right? Like it's definitely being digested within a larger context or era. So having the film come out so recently between COVID, between Black Lives Matter, this year has especially catalyzed a reckoning with race disparities, technology, uncertainty, and more. So how do you think that context influenced the way the film rolled out? And how did it impact the message itself?
When the film released in January, which was the last, I was so grateful to see it with an audience. It was like the last film festival that ever was. It probably also was a super spreader event for COVID. But I got to see my film with an audience, which was an incredible event. And then when COVID happened, I thought, people are not going to have capacity for a film like this, because it's a film that requires some level of intellectual engagement, and it's sort of not a Dumb and Dumber kind of film, and so I thought people wouldn't have an appetite for it, and then I think the world changed. I owed a debt of gratitude to millions of people who took the streets peacefully to fight for human rights and civil rights around the unjust murder of George Floyd. And because that happened in June, it changed the way that my film was being received, because suddenly people wanted to talk about systematic racism. And it was in that moment that I really saw sea change happen, which is 3 of the largest tech companies in the world, multinationals, changed their policy of selling facial recognition to law enforcement. We saw IBM said that they would get out of the facial recognition game. They won't research this stuff. They won't deploy it. They won't sell it. They're out of the game, which that's sea change I never thought would happen when I started making this film. Microsoft said that they would not sell any more facial recognition to law enforcement. And Amazon said, as a token of good measure, they would press pause for a year following those other 2 announcements. So we're good till June 2021 with Amazon. But that happened because of brave scientists like Joy, like Timnit, like Deborah, who are unencumbered by corporate interests. And we now see the importance of independent science that is not curtailing to corporations, and how important that is. And science communicators, which I hope I am one of them, because we have some hard problems to solve. And it's really important. I mean, you're at Harvard, but so many people feel so disempowered when we start to talk about AI. I mean, including people in the film who fought these technologies, like Trinae Moran, you know, the Brooklyn resident who was fighting a landlord installing facial recognition in their building, or the school teacher, a middle school teacher who was an excellent teacher who got arbitrarily graded by an AI and said that he was a bad teacher and needed disciplinary action. And it wasn't true. And so all of these people felt so disempowered. And so what I realized that it was really this combination of independent science, science communicators, and people taking the streets based on that science that really led to this sea change that I never thought possible. And because of that combination of things, you know, sort of independent science coupled with engaged citizens, engaged people of a democracy, that actually brought about this change. And I think that's a recipe. And because of that, it sort of makes me feel like we have a moonshot to call for ethics and technology. And it goes to show that we can make technology companies change when we stop believing the hype, like it's all magic and we shouldn't engage. And so one of the things I hope Coded Bias does is act like an inconvenient truth, a landmark film that can sort of help people understand groundbreaking science that is of benefit to everyone. And also that we all have a place at the table, that it shouldn't just be people at elite institutions that have a role in shaping AI, because these systems are deployed on all of us. So we should all have a voice in questioning them and governing them.
Sorry, the unmute button sometimes is not on. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think you've alluded to this a little bit, but you know, there were many scenes in the film that showed individuals trying to take back their power. So whether spoiler alert for those who haven't watched the film yet, but for the man who was in the streets of London and he was covering his face from the facial recognition devices, or to the tenants that you had alluded to in the apartment building in Brooklyn, or to the teacher. But I guess, what is the message that the documentary has in terms of individuals reclaiming back their power and standing up to some of these tech companies? What do you hope, you know, that people will take away from this?
You're so right. I mean, I think there is that moment where you see a free citizen, you know, and they're just like covering their face because they don't want real-time facial recognition by the police. It's noteworthy to say that I could only capture that moment in the UK because there are laws in Europe. And because there were laws in Europe, there was some degree of transparency. Versus here in the States, the police are using these technologies in secret. There was a Detroit man who was arrested in front of his friends and his neighbors, held for 30 hours, and never asked for his license because he was wrongly identified by police facial recognition, which it was by accident was disclosed because they don't have to disclose. We don't have any laws. And that's what's so crazy about this. And in spite of that, the Detroit Police Department is still using real-time facial recognition. And the fact that Big Brother Watch UK that did these studies found over 2,000 people were wrongly misidentified. I mean, that doesn't seem like a cost benefit ratio when 80% of the people that you're flagging are misidentified. And that's a conservative estimate. I'm giving you the most conservative estimate.
But those numbers are still scary.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I mean, the highest numbers are upwards of 90% misidentifications. And so that moment was such a important one to me because it was a moment where I really just saw the overstep of these technologies. That's where civil rights, that's the line right there. And we as free people are not supposed to be stopped and frisked by police without a warrant. And yet this computer is giving them that sort of autonomy. And that is what is really scary to me. And so for me, imagine how this could be used if, say, all of the cameras in the United States were hooked up to real-time facial recognition. I live in New York City, where there's a lot of CCTV cameras since 9/11. We don't know how many of those are real-time facial recognition in truth. I know that someone was attacked on the subway and they found the guy in 2 minutes, which is like, oh, this is why we use it. But what about the rest of us? And if you are going to a protest and you've got real-time facial recognition, will you go if you have questionable immigration status? Will you go if you're on probation for something, or if you're on public assistance for something? And there's where these technologies intercede with our right to assembly, our freedom to associate, all of these other kinds of laws. And I think some of it is that they're going right from big tech to our streets with no one in the way. And that's what I didn't realize. There was a moment where I'm sitting in Congress and I'm listening to Joy testify before Congress. And Jim Jordan, who's a right-wing Republican from Ohio, Trump supporting guy, and AOC, who's a left-wing, left of center Democrat from Queens, right, New York, agree, which is something I never saw. They agree. There was a moment where they say, Jim Jordan says, well, wait a minute, 117 million Americans are in a police database that they can warrant, and no one elected is overseeing this process. And seeing the Republicans run scared with the Democrats, that these technologies are being introduced to law enforcement with no one we elected, not we the people, overseeing this process. And that is what the fear is that Joy's, when she realizes that facial recognition doesn't see her dark-skinned face, that this is not a technology that's on a lab somewhere. This is the same technology that's being sold to the FBI, that's being sold to ICE and immigration officials, that's being already used sometimes in secret by law enforcement. And that's where I began to see that we don't have an FDA for algorithms, that there is literally no standard of safety and practices. And that's when I began to realize that, people always ask me if I love technology, if I see like a good use. I'm like, I'm a huge techie. Everyone in my film is a huge techie. We are in this work because we love technology, but saying that you believe in an FDA doesn't mean you don't like food. It means that you believe in a certain standard of safety and health for that food. And that is something that doesn't happen once, but happens perpetually. And that's what we don't have yet. And that's what I hope that we'll have, because the change that we're seeing, I think people always want to ask about, like, what can I do as an individual? And the truth is that these systems call for systematic change. And that means that we have to get behind organizations that are doing this work.
Yeah, definitely. And it brings up a really important parallel theme in the film, which is the concept of privacy, right? And one thing that we hear often with our work is that there was a phrase at the beginning of the film called data is destiny, right? Joy talks about that. And there's an optimistic twist of that where we say, if data is destiny, what we need is just more data, right? If we want to correct these data biases, we just have to collect more data. But that approach to a threshold of accuracy is often, it needs to be balanced with privacy. So I'd be curious to know what you think, or what you would say to people that say, well, all we need is just more data, and we'll be fine, and we can correct these systemic biases.
Yeah, the tech bros love that one. Technology companies love that one.
Yeah.
Let's create the it's just garbage in, garbage out. And, we just got to clean up the data and get better data sets and have more inclusive data. And I really want to resist that, because, like Joy says, then we'll just have perfect invasive surveillance. And is that really what we want? If facial recognition works perfect on Black faces and women's faces, and then we'll have a perfect invasive surveillance. And is that what we want? To me, that it's not a question about creating a perfect algorithm, but creating a more humane society and the fundamental ways in which we want to use technology. And I think that what the brilliant and badass cast of my film made me realize is that we've just put this blind faith in big data, and we have this idea that technology can solve everything, and that a technological solution is always the best solution, and it's not. If you look at like COVID tracking systems, and the way Google and Apple have rushed in to say, like, we've got this tracking system down. We just are going to make an app, and we just need to know everywhere you go and everyone you've been around. First of all, that's the kind of data. I mean, already the data that Facebook and Google have about us make the East German Stasi look like they were cute, like they had a light touch, that they like knew a little bit, but like literally that's how heavy-handed. Like, these companies have the ability to create entire psychological profiles with very, I mean, to the extent where they can predict our sexual orientation. I mean, before we even know it. Sometimes you guys are in college, so sometimes even before we know it. And so all of that is to say that this is an incredible amount of power and data, and just even the amount of data that these companies have need to be reined in, because there will never, you know, Amy Webb talks about how there's only 9 companies that will ever be in AI because they've had a 15-year head start on our data. There will never be a search engine like Google as long as they have unfettered access to this 15 years of our data. They have this head start that no other company has. And so to me, it is about starting to think about data rights as human rights. Starting, you know, I also don't identify the word with the word privacy. Invasive surveillance is the word that I think most accurately describes what these companies are doing. And also that we've got to start understanding that data rights are human rights, and that by way of being citizens, we should have some basic fundamental rights. I mean, there are things happening like Asian kids are getting higher rates of SAT prep scores in certain neighborhoods, not SAT prep classes. They're getting charged higher rates. In another low income neighborhood, Latino kids are getting predatory University of Phoenix ads. This starts at a young age, where we get algorithmically, we have this algorithmic determinism. And there's got to be some sort of equal playing field where that becomes visible to us, where we see the infrastructure of that. And that is what is so dangerous to us, is that we don't see the way in which our worldview is being informed, the way our zip code is being used to make predictions about who we are, and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if all I see is University of Phoenix ads and I'm not getting any other thing, maybe I think this is a good college. And so to me, it isn't about building the perfect algorithm. It is about that there's too much power in the hands of the few for a democracy to work in a healthy way.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of, going back to the point that you made, where when you were sitting in that room where Joy was testifying, you saw the Democrats and Republicans agree. And when there is that just overwhelming amount of evidence of this surveillance state by the private sector, and we have people on both sides agreeing with the risks with this aggregation of power, when you're sitting in that room, what did you think was necessary to then push that forward, right? It feels like we're all waiting for somebody to make a move legislatively. And if we have that agreement, what do you think can really push people into the realm of taking action?
Well, I think that you can start with a facial recognition ban on your campus. That's something that can be done. That's like campuses are doing it all over the country. There's a great organization called Fight for the Future that is doing it and focuses on, first they started with young people at music concerts, not having facial recognition when there were music concerts. And now people are doing it. And you see in your own backyard in Massachusetts, the ACLU of Massachusetts pushed for a facial recognition ban in Cambridge and in Somerville, and it's happened in Oakland and San Francisco. And you see technological hubs who understand how this works being the first to ban these technologies. And that shows us something about how these technologies should be rolled out for the rest of us. So I think that, you know, when a university like Harvard takes a stand campus-wide on facial recognition or on data protection, and you push for those sort of protections on your campus, it sends a message to the local and the state, and especially your university in particular, because you're thought of as the cream of the crop. When you make a statement like that, it ripples out to the rest of the nation. And I think the more that you can do something focused on your campus, you'll see the ripples. And you see that more and more. And I think that the more that we get, we came close to it in California of having a data protection just by a state. If we can get that passed in one of the states, I know that Illinois has some data protections that other states don't have. And what happens, like we saw with GDPR, is that when one region gets data protection, the tech companies don't want to do one thing for one state and then one thing for 49 states. They don't want to do one thing for Europe and still have to do one thing for the US. So they tend to try to push a universal law. So to me, I would not underestimate the power of local action. And I would go to Coded Bias. We've done a lot of work on our Take Action page, and we have a whole coalition of organizations, from organizations that are doing work culturally in your backyard, like the Algorithmic Justice League, to the ACLU of Massachusetts that's doing incredible work, some of the most groundbreaking work in the nation around this that you can tap into, to Fight for the Future, to Mi Gente, so many others, where you can look at the intersection of what you care about and AI, because it's going to touch everything, whether you care about women's rights or gay rights or whatever your passion is, it's going to touch that. And you can find an organization that cares about that and works at the intersection of those rights.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll hop back to this topic in a bit, but I do have one question to squeeze in here that's a little off track, which is just, there was one scene in the film that was so powerful to me, and it was when Joy was getting her hair done, and she recites a new verse from her spoken word. And I'm curious to know what your intention was when you crafted that scene, because to me it was really humanizing. And I think the unfortunate thing is, especially women of color are often not shed in a really humanizing light in public spheres. And so I would love to know, more about what you were thinking.
That was actually Joy's idea, to shoot a scene, which I loved. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
We loved it.
Yeah. I was like very grateful. It was like my favorite scene, and we shot it fairly early, but I loved that location because we had a whole talk about, you know, and when you're dealing with smart people, you kind of have to explain to them that we need more than your research. Like, people don't care about AI, but they'll care about you as a person. And so there was that sort of understanding, but I was really excited about that scene because it's a privilege scene. I mean, not just Black women, but any women of color at the hair salon know that there is a thing that happens with women at the hair salon. Right? There's a certain kind of intimacy, and I think especially with Black women. And I think that it's not a space where you usually talk about technology. And I loved that we could bring things that we didn't see as together, like a Black woman talking about her love of robots right? While she's getting her hair done.
Yeah.
And to just bring that into the mix of things, for those of us who have intersectional identities, we inhabit those spaces every day where two parts of ourselves don't make sense together, but they exist together. And so I feel like that was one of those really special moments where you got to see the intersection of, like, you know, where all of these things meet. And so it was a really special, I think I'm really grateful for that scene.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so now going back to something you made a comment about before, which is just like in the narrative building sphere, especially around emerging technologies, there are limited people at the table, right? There are a lot of people crafting narratives about technologies that also are building the tech, have the capital to fund the tech. And something recently that came up was that Andreessen Horowitz announced that they're launching their own media outlet, and they're a really big venture capital firm with over $15 billion of a funding pool. And what they want to do is not only fund the tech, but also build the narrative. So thinking about how can you get alternative voices to the table at the storytelling phase, because it feels like that is where the power is, right? If you can really get people to understand at an individual level the way technology is really pervasive in their lifestyle and the way that it impacts them, especially minority communities. How do you work against these really big entities that have the capital to spin off their own media arms and to really control that narrative in a way that individuals don't often have resources to do?
Oh, it's such an important question. I'm so grateful for it, because I have to say that I took a lot of risks telling the story, and also getting it distributed, because a lot of the platforms that are now in charge are Amazon and algorithmic based. And I think we'll just put a pin in that there. But, and also that I had to submit almost a Harvard dissertation backing up my documentary, just to get insured, because for broadcast, because the insurance people were so scared that it does. I said, but this is true. This has all been written about in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and it's well documented. And the insurance company came back to me and said, it doesn't matter. Literally, they said in a phone call, it's not in writing, but they said like, literally, it doesn't matter if it's true. It's Amazon. They can tie us up in court for your insurance policy for the next 5 years with their team of lawyers. And that's when I realized it doesn't matter if it's true. Like, for independent journalists, if you look at who's challenging the big tech companies around journalism, you have to go to PBS. There's literally nobody else. Look at people who are really challenging these platforms. They're not getting distribution in the mainstream. And so this is a problem. Like, the people even speaking out at big tech, who's doing this? PBS. God bless public television. If you want to see the Bezos documentary, that's where you go. And so there's a real problem about challenging these tech companies. They're consolidating not just the tech world, they're consolidating the media empire world. And so it is really challenging. And if you look at, I'm so grateful to particularly the Black women scientists in my film. They put their academic reputations on the line to challenge these corporations.
Right.
And they did. These are grad students, just, not much older than you, like probably around the same age. They're graduate students, right? And they literally just challenged the biggest tech companies in the world. And they did so because they had the training of the scientific method on their side. And they could say to them with integrity, my results are replicatable. And I want to say something that I won't, but like, forget it. You can't challenge me. I got this. And that's what it takes. It takes that kind of bravery to say, I'm a scientist. And some of you might go to work for Google or for Facebook. And what I beg of you is to be that dissenting opinion. Google just fired Dr. Timnit Gebru and sparked 2,500 people who wrote out in at Google, and 2 other people resigned as a result of that firing, because she spoke out against AI. A year before my film premiered, Joy had Amazon discredit her research. First they laugh at you and then they join you, right? And that happened because people took the streets and said, no, she's right. you can't. And so it is that combination of informed science and engaged citizenry. Like, to me, that's the recipe. It's how my film got distribution. And I would not underestimate the forces that want to keep this a secret, that don't want to talk about these issues. I say that these 3 tech companies took action in June of 2020. It's not like the research on bias in AI came out in June of 2020, right?
Definitely.
The largest civil rights in 50 years happened in June 2020. That's what we know happened. And that's what pushed them to act. So the companies can be partners in this work. They've all screened the film. I've had great, sometimes off the record signed NDA contracts and conversations with them. They are interested in these topics. There are people inside these companies with conscience, and we need to create an environment inside these companies where these dissidents can be heard, and that they are not fired, that they're not dismissed, it doesn't take a big social movement. And we need people like you that when you go to work at these companies are brave enough to say, sorry, this isn't, what is also important to me is that people always ask me, why is it all people of color and women and religious minorities and queer people in your film? and I realized that not only is the brilliant and badass cast of my film incredibly astute in terms of they're all PhDs and some of the smartest people that I've ever talked to. I think there's 7 PhDs in the film and advanced mathematics. Like Kathy O'Neill was trying to tell me how she knitted the equation for pi into a sweater. Like they're totally
Rubik's Cube was like so fast.
They're totally on some stuff that I don't, my eyes glaze over. I like a little bit of what they understand in the world, and I'm grateful for that. But they also had this different identity where they were outsiders. They were misfits. They had an experience that was not centered. And they began to ask the question that Kathy O'Neill frames so well when she says, for whom could this system fail? And that's when I began to realize that, one thing that I have more compassion about in this national conversation that we're having about bias is that this is not something that just some bad cops have. This is not just bad people have bias. This is an innate human condition that we need to control for. You have it, I have it, the Mother Teresa has it. Everybody has bias. And so once we sort of have compassion for that, then it becomes a scientific thing that we can control for, that we need checks in place. And the way that we do that is having some people who aren't all white, male, and educated at Harvard, Stanford, and John Hopkins in the room when these decisions are made. No offense to you guys, but you've got to have some people from San Jose State in the room who might have there's a whole pipeline of Latinos who are coming out of San Jose State. Why can't they get jobs in Latinas and Latinos and Latinx, all of those people why can't they get jobs in the tech industry? And so to me, it really goes to show that inclusion isn't just about the front of the pictures and making the pictures better, but that this is actually something that makes us more competitive in the industries of the future in systems that are deployed on the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest question around this is also, and it gets to that point, which is when we think about accountability and thresholds of what's good enough, how do we think about that, especially when we all have such strong inherent biases as humans, right? We all have that humility. And so when we think about what is good enough, that seems to be the question that surrounds all of this. And I guess what you would say is it building in that inclusivity from product inception through development through deployment? Is that how we kind of get to it, along with, of course, regulation and like that complementary system?
Yes, to me, I think that big tech putting their invasive surveillance, racially biased technology down, not selling it to law enforcement was great. That was a good first gesture, but to
me, yeah.
To me, as long as it's up to them, there's an imbalance in a democracy. That's just too much power. And a lot of our legislators don't even understand how these systems work. You have senators asking Mark Zuckerberg how Facebook works, and he has to say, "We sell ads, Senator." Like, that's ridiculous. This is like a multi-cajillion-dollar industry, and our senators don't basically know what the business model is. Like, that's crazy. And so I feel that some of this is about, I would like to see AI education be part of our basic curriculum starting with 6th grade. As soon as you get a cell phone, you should know how it works. It shouldn't be like, oh, this is just magic. As soon as you are able to use the technology, we should start with literacy of how these technologies work. And I have on the Coded Bias website, we have a discussion guide with some basic like keywords and glossaries, and trying to get a baseline language. My favorite comments were like, "I watched this film with my grandma and she liked it." And I was like, yeah, because your grandmother should have a place at the table. Your immigrant grandma should have a place at the table about how AI works. And she should be able to say, like, why is my Google search showing me white supremacy sites? Or she should be asking those kinds of questions. And we don't have basic literacy in these subjects, and it shouldn't just be for elite kids when we all use these technologies. So that is where I would start, is that we need some baseline education, and it shouldn't just be for elite people.
Yeah, totally. We are at the Kennedy School of Government, so many of our students are studying public policy in different areas and fields, and so educating policymakers is something that's to the heart and to the core of the Technology and Public Purpose Project. So
I just want to add that at the Kennedy School, there you have a national treasure named Dr. LaTanya Sweeney, who was the former chief technology officer of the Federal Trade Commission, and is one of the founders of the reasons that we have any kind of fairness in algorithms. And I just interviewed her for a Nova special that is going to come out in April. And so she's a national treasure that is sitting right there at your university around this work.
Definitely. So hear that, students. Take Professor Sweeney's class if you haven't already. So with that, I think we can open the floor to questions. So please use the chat feature to send us your questions.
In the meantime, while things are rolling in, you mentioned the Nova special. So are there other things that you're working on in this topic?
Yes, I mean, that is just a month out. That's sort of about bias in Google searches, but I would like to do sci-fi, and I have other films strange films. I like weird science topics, and I like to be intellectually promiscuous. So I like to venture into new realms of. This isn't the only thing I like to make films about, but it is something that will captivate my imagination for a long time. I'd like to see a science fiction made on this topic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you talked about, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Talked about the blowback from tech companies. Are you allowed to delve into that a little bit? Because, I mean, some of these movies that you are making are a little bit provocative in terms of, the Google search documentary and some others. So, yeah, I would love to hear
well, they participate. I'm in touch with the Google team, the press team. They participate in the film. These companies, it's in their interest to engage with us. And, when I went to Sundance, like I said, I had the benefit of seeing the film with the audience. I had someone who worked at Google come up to me and say, this is a conversation we've been having internally, and you made a conversation we all could have together. And it's not like these companies don't know this is happening. They know it's happening. They've been knowing it's happening. They just have not held their feet to the fire. And that's where we see change, is that we have not yet told them to act, that we care about this enough and we won't tolerate this anymore. And I think that's where we, the people, have to take a stand. And that, you know, and it's really, it can feel really hard because this is an issue like climate change. It takes science communication, it's complicated and requires systematic changes. Individual effort will only get you so far, although individual effort does matter. And so it really is like go to a great organization and put and support them to do great work is the best that we can do.
Yeah.
But the more that we can support, like Dr. Timnit Gebru, who was just fired from Google, there was a petition on her behalf. But the more that we can support this sort of independent science research that's coming out of these companies and these voices of dissent, I think also like buying these books and these researchers, I think, you know, the better we'll be.
Yeah, and so there is a component of, so there's a science research that really matters, right? To back up claims that there is bias or whatever risk assessment of a different technology or of a given technology. But I guess there's another component, which I think is like the flip side of science education, that people who do not have a traditional STEM background should still have a seat at the table, right? And I think tech companies sometimes weaponize tech literacy against different individuals, saying like, well, you just don't know enough about the technology to really make a strong claim about the risks that it poses, about technical opportunities to solve those risks or whatever it might be. So how do you think about, I guess, almost building that credibility even without a STEM background, right? Like feeling like you have the right to be at the table regardless of whether or not you're technically trained or not, because sometimes those voices are the ones that bring the outside of the box perspective.
Oh yeah, especially with people of color and women.
Yeah, totally.
Right? If you're queer or anything like LGBTQ, anything like that, you're just like, does my voice matter? And am I an imposter? And is it okay that I ask the question? Totally. All I would say is ask the question. You have every right to be at that table. You have every right. And I had the same thing. Like, I'm an artist. I don't come from this background, and I was terrified. I mean, even to sit in an audience like you, I you know, my master's is from the City College in New York, Harvard of the proletariat. And so, and so basically I was afraid, oh my God, am I going to use machine learning or misuse AI, or, oh my God, I'm going to have a usage thing and everyone is going to laugh at me and discredit me. And luckily I was the public school kid who went to an elite university, and the first day I went to that elite university, they were using all kinds of big words. And I was an immigrant kid, and my first, raised by a single mom, my first language wasn't English. And I came home crying. I was literally like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. Then I like wrote down all the words and I looked them up, and I was like, they didn't say a damn thing. I was like, they didn't say anything.
Very common.
Yeah. Intellectual mumbo jumbo, and they didn't say anything. And that's when I understood I have a right to ask questions. And I am now the first person to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what that word means. If you can't say it in simple English, then you're not that good of a scholar. I'm sorry. And I'm lucky that I've had great scholars that have spoon-fed things to me that are complicated and could tell a fourth grader their argument. And that is the sign of true intellect. And it's intellect that also comes with compassion and with empathy and with some sort of humanness. So I would say, be the pain in the ass, ask the question, say you don't know a word when you don't know a word, because you may actually know better or more than the person who's actually in the room. And to me, I will also say that as an artist and as someone who doesn't come from this background, I ask different questions. And those questions make them reflect differently. Like, I've now sat with Stanford AI and they had, you know, all these multinational, and they're interested in what I have to say. And so all I'm saying is, like, you are valuable. Everything that you've brought to your experience, whether it's is valuable in learning about AI, and it's an asset and not a it's not something that encumber you. So all I could say is ask when you don't know something. We all have a right to ask questions and to feel empowered.
Yeah, that's great.
So we have one question that came in. An attendee asked, you mentioned that Congress doesn't understand technologies or the business models undergirding social media companies. What does Congress need to do to get smarter on these issues?
Gosh, they need more young. I think it would help if we had some more young people in our Congress. It would help. I mean, AOC was like teaching people how to do Twitter. I think that we need to educate them. I really think that that's how it's going to happen. Is that and I saw in Congress that some people were reading Shoshana Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism, so it was interesting to see what was on the congressional reading list. But I think that the more that we can sort of write, sometimes I have something and I want to put it on Twitter, and I'm like, is that really going to do anything? Let me hit up Schumer real quick. And so instead of posting it on Twitter, which maybe would be great for my echo chamber, I hit up Schumer and Gillibrand instead. And so that would be the thing that I would do, and you're Harvard students, so you already have pedigree. What you say already matters. And honestly, if you get 50 students at Harvard to sign a petition, you already have power that nobody else has. I'm being really serious. You put out a petition, you get 100 people at Harvard to sign it, which is really like one email, and saying we don't want facial recognition anymore, and this is why. We're in solidarity with Black communities that have been over-policed, and we don't want to deal with this. Done. It's done. And I feel like that kind of power you can flex. And also what Harvard supports in its $43 billion endowment, you have a lot of say there. And so I think as students at Harvard, you have a lot of say in sculpting how these technologies go down. I mean, you could even write an open letter to your congressional leaders. So I would not underestimate that at all.
We have another question that came in. Hi, Shalini. Thank you so much for the conversation. What are some of your daily practical strategies for minimizing the impact of surveillance technology, AI bias in your life work?
It's really tricky because I think people always ask me that. I'm like, I deleted TikTok. Signal's a little better than this. Bluebeam is a little better than Zoom. But the truth is, we all need some laws. I don't really know what the terms of conditions said when I got in here. We shouldn't have to decide whether your child goes to math class or whether that company has your child's face and facial recognition forever. I don't do those 10-year things that say how your face has changed. I don't do any of those gamified things. I don't post protesters' faces. They can be scanned by law enforcement and identified. I try to protect protesters by not putting their faces on social media. So there are little things that I can do like that. But really what I do is I support organizations like the ACLU and the Algorithmic Justice League and Fight for the Future, who are really—
Oh, your audio has cut out a little.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is it any better now?
It's still a little low. Amritha, can you
shut it on? Is that better?
A little bit.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's what I would say is like there are these little things you do. I've got tape over my camera, all that stuff. But really, we need some laws. We need some laws. It's a wild, wild west, and we need some laws. Also, some of us have some rights because our data goes through Europe. So in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where our profiles were being marketed to by voters in a very targeted way, there was recourse we could take because our data transited through Europe. So we do have some rights there because our data goes through Europe.
We should just reroute everything. Everything should just go through Europe.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I guess we have one last question, which is, how do you suggest, somebody is asking, how do you suggest we get on top of this when regulating sometimes is too harsh? That's, I mean.
I don't think regulating is too harsh. I would say that regulating is the vehicle by which innovation grows. To me, what I feel is that we have had a stunning lack of imagination around how these technologies are used. I learned also that there was always this conversation that happened between science fiction writers and creators and AI developers. Marvin Minsky at MIT was in touch with Arthur C. Clarke, who was the author of 2001, where HAL, this robot becomes this sort of bad robot in the film. And I make homage to that, not knowing how many people had not seen 2001, which would be like, oh God. but I think that, to me, we've been sort of brainwashed to believe that the only way that these technologies can work is that to give a very few amount of companies unfettered access to our personal data that they get without any laws or without paying us, right? They're economically benefiting from our data. And also any laws. Like, there are more laws that govern my conduct as an independent filmmaker and journalist than that govern speech on Facebook. And that is because even though 1 billion people get their news on Facebook, they don't have the same laws that, say, CBS or NBC have about what can go on their platform. That means if you slander me on Facebook, I can sue you, but I can't sue Facebook. And as long as that happens, we don't have a common shared reality. And that's really dangerous. I was just in a cab with someone, and they were like, they literally handed me a packet of misinformation about COVID because I asked him to roll down the window and wear a mask. And he literally he gave me a handout paper of COVID misinformation. I'm going to report him to the authorities of tourism, right? But as long as we don't have the same reality, this is a threat to democracy. We're now seeing misinformation is how authoritarianism rises. And until we don't have just basic rules around telling the truth on these platforms, and that these companies should be held to the same standards of truth that I, as an individual, have to be held to say anything about them, that is a problem. And I think that regulation is not, we live in a wild, wild west. Technology companies need to be regulated like every other sector of society. They are not regulated whatsoever. That's a problem. And I think that legislation like climate change can unleash innovation, because it's saying these are the rules. It's got to be safe for everybody. It's got to be healthy for everybody. It's got to be in everybody's best interest. It can't be predatory. It can't be discriminatory. It can't violate civil rights. And that's the basic standard of what we're going to do. And that will unleash a new type of innovation on the internet. And it's my belief that because a small group of people have monopolized this technology, that we don't actually know what innovation or unleashing new kinds of imagination look like. And so it's my belief that regulation actually unleashes innovation and doesn't constrain it.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to the overarching concept of who's telling the story, right? And I think it's ironic that they're saying that there will be these chilling effects with regulation, but in reality, if we can imagine a bit more, then we can see there's a whole horizon of other opportunities, even within the confines of some regulation.
Absolutely, and the kind of income inequality we're seeing as a result of this is unbelievable. The world's first trillionaire. We're going to see the world's first trillionaire. That's cray. That's really, it's really just insane.
It's just so hard to even conceptualize.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we are out of time, but thank you so much, Shalini. This was
so much.
an
Thank you so
incredibly
much.
thought-provoking conversation, and it was really interesting to hear your perspective. And thank you for making this film in the first place. It's such an important story to tell, and we're so glad you told it in the way that you did. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. For more conversations and events, you can follow us on Twitter at @TAPP_project. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.